So, welcome everyone. Welcome to this program, Reflections on the United Nations Summit of the Future, with author and thought leader Richard Bowell. And as you'll see, Richard's joined us for the program. And so, welcome, Richard. And given Richard's life work, we might have also entitled this program, How Conscious World Citizens Might Guide Us into a Positive and Prosperous Future. I'm Dr. Kurt Johnson. So let me begin with some context about why we're here and why we're sharing this video. This month, September 2024, thought leaders and activists from around the world will be gathering in New York City for the United Nations Summit of the Future. And the day before, prominent thought leaders championing what we might call a unitive or profoundly interconnected and holistic worldview will be gathering at Cathedral St. John the Divine in New York City for a special event in advance of the summit. Now, Richard resides in Denmark and Greece, developing the People, Planet, and Purpose project for the Conscious World Citizens, so he's not going to be able to join us in New York City. So we wanted to create this opportunity for him to comment on this global conversation from the background of his own work and vision. So we thank our sponsors, the Living Earth Movement and the Education Synergy Circle of the Evolutionary Leaders, and we'll be having them include for your own information on the final credits pages of this video, further information and contact information on Richard and Conscious World Citizens. The Netflix film on the humanitarian work that Richard has done in Animals of Greece and for their environment has been viewed by over 65 million people. Richard has, among other contributions, written a number of prominent books on the vision of Conscious World Citizens and its relationship to global goals, not the least of which are the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations and the Summit of the Future. So with that as a background and context, let's go over right now to discussing a number of questions with Richard that are both germane and timely to this year's Peace Week and the Global Summit of the Future event, and about who Richard is and what he brings to the table at this critical time in history. So first of all, Richard, I know that there's quite a unique context in how you've been living and what you've been doing for a number of years now in your own modeling of conscious world citizenship. And in short, for the last 12 years, you've lived on quite a remote Greek island, which is actually where you're sitting right now and will tell us more about, contemplating the future of the way humans might actually change in line with the larger narrative of why we're here on the planet. And what you've thought through are some really interesting things. So Richard, tell us about that and what that experience has shaped in your worldview and vision.
Okay. Kurt, first of all, thank you very much, because you've been so central to so many people being able to discover their position in these new times. And I have just so much respect for the work you've done. I wish I could interview you one day, but okay, it's this way around today. Although in some ways we've been in dialogue for 6, 7 years, because a lot of the dialogue of these times is taking place inwardly and not outwardly. So let me just introduce you to my study. I'm on a remote Greek island. I came here in 2010 for a 1-year sabbatical. I suppose I would explain that in terms that from a very young age, I felt uncomfortable with the world around me and saw that it was too violent, too conflicting, too far away from the natural worlds. And that really was joined to an inner sensitivity, you could say a spiritual inclination, if it's all right to use that term, that suggested that there was something else that I might connect to and join that would be far more fulfilling than winning my place in the world. But of course, I had to do that to live. I was a student of medicine, a student of philosophy. I went on a lot of searches for truth. And I did have a very large chunk of my life, also about 12 or 14 years, in a kind of inner journey. Anyway, really to come to these last 12, 14 years on this Greek island, it's an opportunity that I guess very few people have to contemplate the questions of our time over a long period. And I know very much through Kurt and other people about Ken Wilber and Greg Braden and Joni Carley and many other really bright lights in the firmament who have their own stories. And thank you, Kurt and Ken Wilber, for endorsing my work. But it seems, even here in this remote place, that there were similar stirrings going on all around the world that I had once thought were alternative and rather remote, that are now, I won't say mainstream, but mainstream along the mainstream, that things have so changed and changing so fast. And I really feel this is the moment that I can share what has gone on in these 12 or 14 years. So here's the context. A lot of those years were me trawling through my thinking, as we do. Books I once read, influences in my life, texts that had impressed me. But here I was on my own, thinking it through. And there was one particular shift that kept nudging me. And it actually was not in words spoken, but I guess words in my head. As a musical creator would hear music in their head, I heard the sort of sequences in my head. And this one said, while we look for the future, while we seek a new future, the future seeks the unfolding of itself in the human. And for some reason, that just completely floored me, and yet was so simple and to the point, that human life is a two-way traffic. And apparently, Rumi said something similar, although I hadn't read it at the time. And in the Veda, there was something similar. And of course, one comes to the great truths. But I will say that, not to try and credit this to myself, but that when you're up against it and you're so weary of your own brain manufacturing answers along the same template, that sometimes frustration and coming to a stop and feeling like you've given up is itself a preparation for beginning. And from that point, I realized that it was my task, if you will, my purpose, my mission, to translate this unique insight that the future was appearing in me. Now, that was not new in one respect. I mean, we say this a lot. We refer people back to themselves and say, well, of course, the answer's in you. And no, it's not about out there, it's about in you. But I'd like to just offer, if I may, Kurt, the change sequence. And I would say almost, and you know, I've been quite reluctant about bringing this out into the world until I really felt it was sound and clear. But that a change sequence, a sequence of change, came in the form of a download. And that download I wrote down over those 14 years, which was really my training in consciousness. And that training was, to a very large extent, me realizing that I was rather the delinquent partner in the future, that where I had exalted my qualifications and books and endorsements, I came to realize, sometimes rather painfully, that I was the delinquent part, and that my ability to be attentive to what was downloading needed tuning. As an example, I made myself available night and day in case some prompt might come where I might say, well, not now, thank you very much. Could it come in the morning after breakfast? And of course, once I did that, it never came back again. Later, I read Ernest Hemingway said virtually the same thing about creative writing, that if you don't do it at the point, you'll never catch it again. And then I read his next sentence, which was also interesting to me, which is that always stop when you can feel that there's something more to say. There's a real insight to the mind-brain connection, that you need to prime the brain to be attentive to something more than itself, more than its own musings. So all of these, and I haven't really got a bibliography, much to my publisher's disdain, I suppose, because I have read almost no books. I have relied upon this unique download and realized that those things that did impress me through the course of my life were themselves downloads, were understandings, were standing under, just like the Upanishads, just like the Sermon on the Mount. They all are characterized by something being set and something downloading. And that for me is thrilling because it proposes a different way of integral learning. Is I cannot make life whole. I cannot make life harmonious. It's only when I'm enjoined, when I'm included in another realm that is itself not divided, that I can become whole. So I'm an experiment. And Kurt knows this very well. I'm a very mixed experiment. I have things to say at certain points, and then other points I feel unsure that it can be conveyed because consciousness cannot be taught. But I suppose two factors have really propelled me to share what I have. The first is that I am deeply disturbed by evolutionary science that suggests that the mind is really an extension of the brain, and it tries to explain all that is happening to people like myself and others that I respect, where our experience is that we are included by realms beyond the ordinary. They're only beyond the ordinary because we have reduced the extraordinary to the ordinary. So I have been very troubled by that trend. And the second thing is that in the last 6 to 9 months, nothing new has come through this system other than the gentle whispering voice that says, this needs to go out into the world. And so when I heard about this conference, which I wish I could be there, and I've stayed in contact through these years, I thought, right, can I offer this alongside my brothers and sisters, my friends, my companions out there, who are all part of that whole, expressing different parts of the hologram, of which maybe I have a unique part, and it's unique in that I've lived it. I am that experiment. So, if I may, Kurt, I think it will take a few minutes. I would like to just share the change coding. And what was 150 pages, when I reread it, I was able to reduce down to maybe 60 pages, having to eliminate my own reflections and my subculture. That's the culture of my brain being excited about how I could see all of this, to the point where I was able to see with clarity a sequence that for me now is the platform of my life that has been distilled from being here. So, the change coding, and I really hope that you might listen to this a few times and let it filter into our conversation with myself and others. It's a very exact way to think about evolution and the direction of evolution, that we're not just blind watchmakers, we're not blindly feeling our way forward, that evolution has a direction, and that we humans are finding ourselves growing into a new function in that major story. And here, let me say that there are 3 phases to it, which, not coincidentally, correspond to childhood, adolescence, and maturing adulthood. Although I would put a little parenthesis there to say that we humans are perhaps spread across adolescence, only with our bodies showing signs of aging and maturing, but perhaps not wholly yet as a human species becoming truly adult. In the evolution story, our human systems, our complex, as I call them, as a complex of influences, began to see the world around us. It was a significant moment. Evolutionary science describes it, although of course we were not there at that point. We have to assume certain things a priori. But we could see the world around us, a rudimentary shadow of the world around us from some cells, some light-sensitive cells that could recognize shapes and forms that would indicate that perhaps there was a threat afoot. Yes, we could hear it as well. Yes, all of these senses, but the seeing perception is the fastest of all of them. And as sight evolved, and the flat cells that filtered light and shadow began to encompass more dimensions, we began to be able to recognize proximity and shape and form. And as our brain began to catalog these, even being able to say, that is a snake, or is likely a snake, that is a saber-toothed tiger, better get out of the way. Well, of course, the evolution of sight is present in us who have sight. This is not excluding people who haven't, because in the whole of this sequence, we'll see that picture emerge. But that we all are now, with the gift of sight that has evolved through those thousands and thousands of years, to have this wonderful design feature. Yes, evolution has done its job. Science has tracked it. All credit. That could be said to be the childhood phase of our evolutionary growth. But of course, just being aware, and that's the word that goes with this first phase, we are made aware from the outside world to the inner world. And our inner world in that childhood is somewhat primitive. Danger, our systems get wired to fight or to flight, all of this we know. But a second phase emerges, a second sight. Oh, it's so thrilling to think of it in the story of which we're part, that somewhere back in time, we humans began to see another segment of what is. Now, there's another phrase played a big part in my years on this island contemplating, that I realized that what is. And when I begin with what I think, and if you watch speech patterns, they're 95%, probably more, beginning with what I think, I feel, I see, I consider. In fact, it's a culture today where people are so identified with what I think that they can't hear what another person thinks. But something must have happened as profound as happened with the beginning of sight and this rudimentary filtering of light coming into the human system in this second phase, which you could characterize as the beginning of Homo sapiens, which is that a space, and we talk about this space in all kinds of contexts, a space became encompassed in which we neither had to react in fight or react in flight, but abide with, be with, see more of what was the case, what is. And we began to see a new segment of what is. So where grass might be food, friendly, or other things might be unfriendly, we were in a position to withhold judgment, if you want, and say, what is this that I'm seeing? This is the basis of scientific exploration, in that we can discover the makeup of grass, the understanding behind it, the process of photosynthesis, the acceleration of knowledge. And yes, I am pointing to that area of the brain that grew exponentially in this second phase, that being able to abide inside that space allows a new realm of choice and also responsibility. Why choice? Is because when we don't react, and the wiring that's in us to react is held back, we have choice. Just like if we don't gorge, which is a gene that wants to eat food immediately in case we can't find new supplies, we can now drift around a supermarket rehearsing the taste of what we might like for dinner tonight. We have endless options, really, decisions to make, and low-level choices. But the point is that science has moved on in the exploration of that space, and is very conclusive of the fact that to learn to restrain reaction and have a refractory moment to hold back allows the growth of potential. To make decisions slowly and carefully, and to be able to live with no decisions, is a very artful and scientific skill. Now, in this exploration, we've explored the world from top to bottom, from pole to equator, from the high skies and celestial worlds to the depths of the ocean. But still, in phase 2, this second phase of seeing, which I would call perception, has both an awareness of the world and an awareness of ourself living in the world, ourself as choosing, ourself as deciding, ourself as having a point of view, ourself as having identity from the background of our training, which is why I really balk at the idea of what I studied at university or what books I've written, because largely they were position papers, remaining open until I could see this third phase. So let's call this second phase perception, the awareness of oneself perceiving the world. Now, from that platform, we have become experts at fashioning the world around us. And because the context of this conference is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I wrote a book for the United Nations about trying to see them not as goals, but as elevations. But these goals are about how we are trying to shape the world. And not only that, but by the date 2030, beyond which it becomes possibly no longer viable to exercise ourselves upon the world. And the language of the SDGs is we will make the world better. We will ensure equality of sexes. We will reduce global warming, but all with the underpinning blueprint, not template, blueprint, because it's a blueprint in that it only encompasses the first two parts of the whole sequence of seeing. What we are now being caused to realize is that the goals that we set cannot be realized by 2030 or even 2040. I was reading on the site, Kurt, that the realization of these goals is 17% successful. And we need urgently a quickening, an essential shift of response. Response is the second phase of human life. Reaction is the first, response is the second. But we're beginning to realize that we cannot do more at the level we are operating. Aren't there famous sayings like that, you know, to continue to think we can do more from this level is, I think, the description of insanity. I think it was something along those lines. So I found myself in this process coming to the realization that human perception had reached its end point. Now, one example is perhaps enough. Yes, I went for a swim this morning, as I do every morning. It was interesting because I have a coffee afterwards, and I know the chap in the tavern, and he said, "Have you noticed the water?" I said, "Yes, I have." He said, "People used to want a front seat in our restaurant, but now a front seat is them sitting with the water up to their knees." I said, "I've noticed. Everywhere you look, there is evidence that this world is changing and showing the distress of all of these 17 SDGs that we've identified, that science has helped us identify. In the inward traffic of perception, it is not that alarming. I actually sat in the front row seat and enjoyed the water lapping against me. But I also was thinking it will not be long before this restaurant is underwater. And of course, we see it everywhere. But the reactions of people and the responses of people to the alarming state of the world do not actually translate into action. And this is what's so distressing. Many young people have more of a real sense of urgency than people who can offer scientific understandings, which has its place. Here's the third and really the vital part of what I want to share. Of course, there's so much more that's in this training that I want to share, but it's not to sell the training because you can't teach consciousness. But if you think that the inward traffic has reached the point where it says we need to change what we do what we do, the way we drive cars, the way we use fossil fuels, how we live. Is it green? Is it sustainable? The what and how levels is where perception has stopped. But there's a third, trying to unfold sequence from a level which is itself harmonious, which is itself holistic, whole, a hologram. We're living in that hologram as unfinished humans. And so the integration of ourself into its world is the beginning of consciousness. There's so much to say, but what we see releases what is into function. What we see of the external environment released into function, a whole nervous system that could handle living on this planet quite supremely, in fact. What we saw about the physical and natural worlds released into function knowledge that allowed us to do extraordinary things. But always seeing releases more of what is into function. In consciousness, seeing what is a unified view. It is to see what is, has no difference between ourself and it. And the first and beginning point of conscious seeing is that we see what is a human living on this planet. We see that, like all humans in the past, we've appeared in this place so that what is has an opportunity to unfold in us. And that there's no difference between what is and consciousness, except that we are strung out between childhood and adolescence at the edge of maturing adulthood. So when you look at the SDGs, and I wrote this in this little book, which was commissioned by the United Nations, where I show the SDGs on one side and what they look like from consciousness, which we're sharing through the Global Center for free, just so that it encourages another view alongside the wonderful work that's going on in these rather special conferences happening. Conferences of the future now, not evolution trying to illuminate the future, but the future illuminating what is in the human. So, yes, we can say we're getting along the road to equality between men and women. But how sad that is really, when you think, and I think this myself, that in my experience of what is, that my stance became almost entirely feminine in being attentive to its emergence, attentive to listening to its unfolding sequence. And without that experience, I would be a man from my background trying to be courteous to the other gender, but never really coming to grips with the fact that without that integration in myself, my learning is predominantly biased towards me doing something to the planet. Kurt, as you know with me, half an hour can become 5 hours, but that's a brief introduction. Really walking through the sequence as for 14 years, I am not proud of being the stupid part or partner of the future. I'm proud to be a little less stupid. That's all. And I'm pleased to be in the company of people who try not to put themselves first, but to try to let the future appear now. Wow, I wish I was there.
No, absolutely, Richard. And what's interesting is that as we've been listening to you, evening has been setting in Greece. It's noon where I am in New York City. It's going between 6 and 7 o'clock where you are. So it's been darkening behind you. So it's very, very good timing. And our commitment to having you give that panoramic view of your vision and then just close out with a couple other short pieces that we want to just chat about for a moment. And as we do that, I'll be getting toward evening even more on your end. So the first is, and you actually mentioned that there's a trigger point that wakes the world up. And as you said, it's even elicited why you've been stepping forward more at this time, is where, as Irvin Laszlo says, you reach a point where you either upshift toward a change or we downshift just automatically to oblivion. And that's a conscious action by the awakened of human in that bottleneck to say now is the time that we must consciously make this change so that we're not living in the past and from the models that don't work from the past, which you also mentioned, but we can build the ones that really embrace not only the vision that you talked of, but the culture that would reflect that vision. So what I wanted to ask you just a bit about is how that bottleneck, the situation that how we've been living, the dominance hierarchy cultures of the world and no sense of partnership consciousness, how that's led us to a truly non-sustainable situation. And now we're trying to make that clarion call to 9 billion people on a very complex planet in a way that we could actually bootstrap our way, into that potential that you talk about. So talk just a little bit about how that bottleneck has been a part of what's awakened you to stepping in with your message even more. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Um, you know, one thing about being here, I won't say on my own, because of course I have learnt to be a partner to myself in this process. Otherwise, I would truly have gone mad. But my experience is that people are not encouraged to be interested in themselves because, and I talk to you in America, they're so obliterated with external, really useless impressions that vacillate between the abyss and the wrong unknown. But it only takes, and this is the importance of seeing, why seeing is the vector of this upshift. It only takes a moment for that change to occur. Now, as I've sat here, of course, I'm as silly as the next. I think, well, how am I going to get this around 9 billion people? I need a new website, really good one. And of course, that's just silly talk, but I realize that actually it is happening and that the context is everything. Now, the world breaking down can signify the end of one world, but it can also signify that our attachment to thinking we can control it, the grip of it is loosening. And, what are the Beatitudes? Blessed are the meek. Suddenly something like that makes sense, that it's all right to be a not knowing person. It's all right for me to stand up at the United Nations and say, when someone asks me a question, I don't know. Or if you get an answer, let me know, because I will get a bit of this, and we need each other, but not from deficiency, but from the fact that obviously my life has been haunted, as I know so many other people's are, by what is, and that I've had moments, from leaving home on my way to school one day and going to New York and telling my mum at the end of the day, I'm now in New York. I can only say that this was either madness, but over time, giving sway to that begins to show a very different coherence. And I knew this time would always come, that we'd have this conversation, Kurt. And I always say to you, I've been the most difficult partner, but I feel it's now right, because I feel that many people feel it's right, that we've all had to get diminished in some way to meet each other. So it's not the Richard view, it's not the Irvin Laszlo view, it's not the Kurt view, although it seems to show a coherence. And as those things become clear, they release a new human into function. So seeing what is a direct connection to what is, and it's a wiring to what is. And once we make one wire, isn't it a scientific thing that when you fire it, you wire it, that one experience is enough for that wire to start, and you begin to distinguish. That's a wire. And this subculture I have in myself, which is, oh yes, I was thinking that. Can I just come in here? Because yes, I knew that 10 years. That's a subculture that is my silliness, my really, but the wire, if someone else says it, I just want to nod. Yes, that wires, that strengthens all of us. That is a new model. We are so crazed by this need to be the one that said it, that sees it, that read it, that can quote it. But I tell you, as this nonsense disperses, and as the time for this nonsense abbreviates, we're beginning to meet each other and say, yes, yes, we are joining. When I see that wire in you, that wire knows, that wire in me knows about you, as that wire in you knows about me, and it is building a platform. And I am hugely pleased that you're on this planet for that reason, because I can't do it on my own, but I can see it on my own. So this builds the platform, and it can build very quickly, and is, I would say, I don't know if you agree, Kurt, it is building. I mean, 5 years ago, oh my God, now something is whispering in the wind. This is, we're in that time now. Sorry, I've gone off a little bit on one of my elegiac meanderings, but.
No, and that's actually where we were going with the conversation, and really the last thing that we're going to wrap up on. It's interesting with twilight, where you are, we're getting flashes of a little light across you, and then a little darkness is definitely going to twilight. So what's interesting is, as you said, the context even of the summit of the future, in the context of what you just said, is that when one sees a fire, one sounds the alarm. When one sees a danger, we're just evolved to sound the alarm. And what's interesting is that the summit of the future itself and the events that we're talking about and the hope that you're talking about, which is what I'm going to ask you about next, actually has come from the United Nations and the Secretary General in seeing that only 15 to 17% of the Sustainable Development Goals have been approaching any fruition, again, because of all the dominance hierarchies of the world and business as usual, which is all about competition and conflict and not about partnership. That was led to the summit of the future and his announcement that the only thing that could address this need for an upshift was a deep and a rapid transformation. In other words, it's like when you see the fire and you pull the alarm, you also tell everybody in the house, move fast. So that's what I want to ask you about next. And you just said it right now, that you see something emerging, a groundswell emerging, that actually gives you hope that, aside from all the negatives of Homo sapiens and our embedded nature of conflict and competition, that we can address and meet this call for partnership consciousness and move in that direction. So what does that deep and rapid transformation mean to you right now? And does it give you hope? And if so, why? And we'll close out with that. That I think would be fantastic.
you know, um, I'm, I, I wondered about myself as well, living in a world in decline, even here on this lovely Greek island. It's so obvious now. And I felt like I was being a little bit of a privileged person, having my own thoughts here. But I see that this sequence of change has delivered me to a place where I'm no longer moving from, I must do something, it's also terrible, to, well, there's not really much I can do, to a state of affairs where pressure and ease, or flow, you might say, is the integrating purpose of why we're here. And that I don't want to miss the next bit, if that makes sense. It's like, what more, this is not a sacrifice. I mean, someone might say, oh, Richard, you've sacrificed 12 years on a Greek island, what you could have done. I say, but I can't think of anything I would rather have done. I feel included in the greatest story on earth, which is why we're here. And I'm meeting now, as I come out of this remoteness, people who are the same. And, I question, was I really ever happy when, I had times of making money and times of being successful in the culture, but I realized that all these models of growth, eternal economic growth, are really non-sustainable, ridiculous, because the growth enzyme of evolution and our growing up inside evolution is the endless growth. It's like we are the growth process. And I would say, if people even catch 1% of what you're gathering there, stay with it until you get 2%. But it is even hopeful. It's a new start hope. It's a new kind of hope, that everything we yearn for is possible, just not the way we yearn for it. Not from emptiness, but from fullness. I feel that the word fulfill, filling fullness, is a sort of key upshift, that it's happening. It's not to be complacent, but it's to be in that conduit of evolution now, of happening now. And I feel it. I don't know how this is for you. Maybe you're thinking this guy's gone off his head in Greece, but I am so enchanted to be in this conversation with you, Kurt. I don't want to go down the bar in the Greek taverna. I don't have that. Not to say life is not to be enjoyed, but it's a wellspring enjoyment from being connected to the great purpose. And now that I've done this, and hopefully I've done something that other people don't get the chance to do for 12 years, I can save people some time in seeing it, as you can from your unique life. That's what we can best do, is say to people, you don't need to spend 20 years in cloister. Once you see one bit of it, you're wiring it. You're wiring yourself to the future. That rapid transformation begins there. Sounds a bit of a summation, but
No, that's fantastic. And we'll end with that. And it's interesting that so many people are saying, wouldn't it be lucky, and perhaps it's true, that the metaphor that we're a part of cosmically is the journey of the caterpillar to the butterfly. If in fact the super organism of the cosmos has within it that built-in direction, inevitably from the caterpillar to the butterfly, no matter what difficulties we may go through, as you just said, we may well be able to meet that and then move into that next phase of our life on this planet, which could be grand, which could be absolutely grand. Looking at the panorama behind you, and as you've said, this planet is so beautiful. If we as a species could be equally beautiful and treat each other in that way, the world would be an amazing place. So, Richard, I just want to thank you, for bringing this message, all of the work that you've done in your life. I think this message is going to touch a lot of people who are in New York this week and beyond, talking about this. It's beyond soul food, and thank you so much. And I just want to direct our listeners to the credits pages right after this. We'll have contact information not only for Richard and Conscious World Citizens, but also links with regard to the Summit of the Future and the other events for Peace Week 2024. So thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone else for joining us.
And thank you, Kurt. And thank you, Kurt. And no one knows more about butterflies than you.
It is my specialty in science, haphazardly, I might say. Let's hope that that's the cosmic metaphor. I'd love to see us just fly off and nectar on the flowers for the rest of time. So let's hope that that's the future. So Richard and everyone, thank you so much, and lots of love to everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kurt.